Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion today with regards to AI and highly regulated industries as part of our IT Nonstop discussions. I want to thank everybody for joining us, our audience, and also our speakers. I'm sure we're going to have a great discussion today, but before we jump into that, let's do some quick introductions. My name is Piekarz. I'm the head of healthcare and life sciences here at DataArt. I've been in the healthcare and life sciences technology industry now for over 25 years. Dmitry, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. So my name is Bagrov. I'm based in London. I'm the MD of DataArt UK. I've been in DataArt for 23 years now.
Wow, 23 years. Make me look like a newbie. Hey, Doug, can you go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is DShaw. I've been in the industry for 30 plus years now. Stopped counting at 30. Worked in the pharma, biologics, and med device industries within the life sciences. I've done consulting. I've worked with big pharma, small startup companies. Always focused typically on regulatory compliance related to software, IT, and medical devices. The last few years, I've been focusing a lot on AI projects and leading the compliance aspect of med device machine learning projects. So happy to be here. Looking forward to our talk.
All right, thanks, Doug. And Apurva?
Yeah, hi. I'm Apurva Mathur. I'm a vice president at DataArt, managing our strategic accounts across a number of portfolios, primarily in the travel portfolio, but also do have accounts in some other portfolios as well. My background, 25 plus years, mostly in the travel industry. It's highly regulated, so I'm looking forward to sharing some of those experiences and issues that we come up with. I have an IT background, and I have worked quite a bit in the AI space, so happy to contribute to this discussion.
Thanks a lot, Apurva. So we're here to talk about AI and highly regulated industries. And since I represent the healthcare and life sciences side of DataArt, I think it's interesting to look back a little bit. The first point where an AI-based solution was actually approved by the FDA and cleared for medical use was way back in 1995. And then over the 20 years following that, while there's been a lot of discussion on AI and AI being tested and used in a variety of different areas, over those 20 years, there were only about 50 different AI-based solutions that were cleared for medical use over the next 20 years. But in the last 5 years, we've seen this trend explode. In the last 5 years, we've seen over 500 AI-based solutions released for medical use in healthcare and life sciences. And I think this really points to the fact that AI today, it's no longer one of those technology buzzwords. It's not just the latest craze. It's actually something that is going to be used to disrupt this industry and many others. And today, when we look at AI and how it's actually being used, one of the key areas where it's already very successfully being used within healthcare and life sciences is in the area of medical imaging. Also, we see a lot of use for AI in the areas of drug discovery, pharmacogenomics, and a few other areas. But since some of the panelists here represent other industries, I'd love to hear, where is AI being used successfully today? And when you think of the next 5 years, where do you think the majority of the disruption is going to come from in these different industries over the next few years? Dmitry, what are your thoughts on this?
It's a very interesting question, Dan. It's really hard to predict the future, and it was really hard to say, for example, where the mobile revolution is going to be having the most impact. I think if I look at it very practically, I think industries where we would feel the most impact is where there's a lot of manual work. sifting, lots of comparing, lots of analyzing very similar chunks of information to get some sort of overlaying overlaying picture out of it. I would imagine that, I mean, medical sciences certainly, I think, I heard you referring to image analysis being very actively used. So I think yes, any industry where there's a lot of data and where the real use of that data is actually is actually making sense of the flow is where AI would make the most impact.
Apurva, what about from your side in travel? Obviously, even transportation areas like self-driving, there's obviously various different areas where AI is being used across other industries. What's your view?
Yeah, I think you're right in that sense. Travel is also highly regulated. It is quite international in nature, so you have to look at international regulations. There's a lot of data that is private. We have personal identifiable information, passport information. We have credit card information. So it is highly regulated in the sense that we need to make sure we have data privacy. So in the travel industry, there are lots of instances where it is highly regulated, and you need to be really careful of how you use AI. There are other examples of other industries, at least that I've come across, where we've used AI successfully. Hazardous waste material, it's highly regulated. So that's another area where I've got examples of where we used AI successfully. And as we get on in the discussion, I'm be happy to share some of those experiences.
That would be great. Hey, Doug, since you represent, very much deep into the area of compliance, regulatory, one of the interesting things, even in preparation for this discussion, that I noticed, I was looking to try to see how AI is being used in other industries outside of my own. And one thing I noticed when you do research and try to look which industries is AI going to disrupt the most, and then you look and see which industries are the most regulated, those two lists could almost overlap each other. Healthcare, life sciences, insurance, finance, hazardous waste. These industries seem to be the industries most primed for disruption through AI. Do you have any thoughts as to why that is, based on your background?
I'll bring up a quick, excuse me, I'll bring up a quick example of one of the major areas I think that will be disrupted by AI moving forward within the next 5 years and beyond is in the area of mental health. And I'll get to your compliance question in just a moment. But there's a tremendous need for mental health resources in this country and around the world. And there's so much data that can be collected, a massive amount of data from speech, voice, keyboard strokes, smartphones measuring activity, movement, even your face. AI can detect from your facial expressions, your emotions, sensors, wearables like heart rate, number of size, those sorts of things. You can just really get a picture of how much data can be collected, and it can be collected passively in most cases. So I think this will come together to create a sort of an image of an individual, and then that will lead to personalized support in the form of maybe digital health assistance, things like that. And there is a prediction that I forget the source, but by 2025 there will be over 1 billion people that will be having regular encounters with chatbots actually to help in the area of mental health. So massive upside, massive potential here. And then of course this has to be regulated. You've got to protect the privacy of individuals. You want to make sure you're making the right recommendations, you're drawing the right conclusions, or AI is rather. And I think in terms of regulations, I think some of the things that we're doing in the life sciences can be applied broadly, because really transparency is key here, so that you can see inside the black box, you can understand what's going on, you can understand what data is being used to train the algorithms and that sort of thing. FDA pushes transparency in the form of documentation and details and independent review and things like that. And I think through that rigor, you come out with a better a better AI solution, actually, and then also protection of patients, patient safety, privacy concerns, ethics, bias, things like that. So I think there's a lot of overlap. I think there's a lot of ideas that can be exchanged between industries, even though we're regulated differently.
Yeah, it's interesting. Over the last, I guess, 2 years, the number of agencies that have come out with more guidance around artificial intelligence. We've seen the White House coming out with what they call, and some of this is in draft, but what they call the AI Bill of Rights. The FDA has come out with guidance around AI for medical devices and other areas. We have the NIST, which has come out with regulatory guidance around AI. Also, I think there's the EU AI Act, and then other regulation and guidance that's coming out in the UK. And one of the key questions or concerns, I guess, is that when you look at certain highly regulated industries, there's a feeling by a lot of people that the regulations slow down progress. And AI being self-learning, being able to change and adjust as new information becomes available to the model. A lot of the value that you can receive that AI can bring has to do with that, quick self-learning, continually updating itself based on the latest information. I was wondering if you guys feel that regulations will get in the way or slow down the adoption of AI, or potentially limit the amount of benefit we can get from these highly technical, intelligent systems as we move forward. Do you think regulations will get in the way? Apurva, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the main thing to consider here is that would the regulations, slow down the process enough where there isn't a real return on investment? Is it costly? Does it lead to changes in the process that we have to, how we use AI? So I think those are some of the factors to consider when we look at bringing down regulations that come in the industry. I would say in the travel industry, we work across the world, right? We've got international regulations that we need to consider. We've got domestic regulations. We've got processes in place that make sure safety is paramount, right? And so if you bring in these regulations like that slow down the process, then yes, for sure, it could impact how we use the technology.
Dmitry, any thoughts from, I know you're very involved in finance and other areas also. Any thoughts in regards to the speed of adoption for AI when it comes to regulations potentially getting in the way?
Well, if the question is whether regulations are going to slow down the adoption and the progress, then the answer is definitely yes, because that's the purpose of the regulations. The regulations are there to make sure that the society is mature enough to accept certain things. They're not there to slow down the progress per se. They're there to make sure that the society doesn't actually become overwhelmed with technological progress. So if the answer to that question is yes, definitely, I certainly hope so, that the regulations would be able to slow the whole thing down, because what we see in the last, not even in the last couple of years, in the last sort of 20, 30 years, the pace of progress is amazing. And it's actually scary. I'm doing when I'm not doing data art, I'm doing tours for kids in Science Museum in London, and I talk about history of technology. And you basically spend 80% of your time talking about the sort of the last 15 years, and only 20% of your time talking about the rest of the history of technology. That so much has happened. So yes, I certainly hope so. But also, Dan, can I ask you a question? Do you like science fiction?
Oh, absolutely.
Have you watched Blade Runner?
It's been many years.
Okay, so I'm a bit of a geek, so I know Blade Runner almost by heart. And if you recall, there's in the beginning there's a conversation between Deckard and Rachel, and Dr. Terrell, and Deckard says replicants are like any other machines. They're either a benefit or a hazard. If they're a benefit, it's not my problem. So AI is going to be like any other technology. It's going to be either a benefit or a hazard. And I certainly hope we have enough common sense to make sure that when they become a hazard, there are bodies and regulations and tools to make sure all of that stays in check.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And obviously, we've seen in I don't know, it was a few months back where Elon Musk and a bunch of other people came together to write a warning around the advancement of AI. So, I think it's obvious that everybody sees the benefit, the huge benefit it could have, but also all very aware of the potential hazards. Doug, with regards to the value that AI can provide, and obviously being in the healthcare industry, I think about things like releasing medical devices that have AI components. And in doing this, when releasing a medical device, it has to go through clinical trials, through testing, through all these different things. And as we know, bringing a drug or a new medical device to market could cost, averages $2 billion, I think. And there's a lot of regulations that have been put around change control, right? Locking down the system so that it's not changing how the algorithm works. It's not changing the data that the algorithm is pulling information from. How do you think it's going to affect the whole self-learning aspect of AI when we're releasing systems that have AI components in an area that needs to go through clinical trials, that needs proper medical testing involved?
Sure. I think in terms of like limiting the benefit of AI, I totally agree that regulations will slow that down. I think one of the reasons FDA implements the rules that they do is to provide transparency, meaning being very clear as to what the purpose of the AI algorithm is, how it's being designed, developed, tested, that sort of thing. And so that transparency, which is typically in the form of documentation, provides the opportunity for a cross-functional human AI team to do a deeper review of what's being developed. I think it's key to have the right team members on board with the right expertise, data scientists, QA folks that understand, how to build and test AI algorithms. So I think, really that's the key. And I think the outcome of that is safer algorithms. You're protecting patient safety. You're providing the opportunity to ask questions along the way, whereas in some cases, AI might just be a black box and a few people within a company or a small company understand what's going on in there. I think it will, it'll reduce the speed to market for sure. And in terms of, learning as you go. So the algorithm is learning from data constantly. What FDA has done so far in that area is they have put out the concept of a pre-approved change control plan. So that would be an organization that is submitting a device or a drug for for approval, they would also say, AI is going to be learning from data along the way. And they would, explain the source of the data, how the algorithm would be monitored over time. And then, at some point there may be additional testing, periodic testing that's being done on the algorithm to make sure it hasn't drifted too far from its original intent of use or intended use. So I think that's still in its infancy, really, the idea of a pre-approved change control plan. But at least there's a mechanism to address that at this point. And that's in terms of say a device that's continuously learning. And then we have the other option, or the other type of sort of subtype of AI, which is machine learning. And in those cases, we're training algorithms and locking them down, and then testing them and then releasing them for use. So they're essentially frozen. And in those cases, you don't have to think about a pre-approved change control plan.
Yeah. So
anyway, still figuring that out. Not figuring it out, but it's still being sort of developed and interpreted by companies in a variety of ways.
There's actually a question from the audience, which, since we're kind of talking about that right now, and it goes along with what Dmitry had mentioned about the benefit versus understanding where a risk is, and what you're talking about, Doug. And the question is, do you think that AI can negatively affect a medical device, can actually cause a problem?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, I think you could trace that all the way. Well, I'll provide one example. I think a key example here is the curation of data for the training of the device. Does that contain all of the features? Meaning, let's just use images as an example. A feature would be size, shape, coloration of, say, a blotch on someone's skin. So, selecting those right features, finding the right data set, making sure the data is representative of the population, making sure that it's not representative of, just one region or one country around the world, and that you've removed bias from it as well. So I think, a rigorous process early on with the right team and the right, sort of considerations and transparency could reduce that likelihood. But I think it could, give false predictions and draw false conclusions or incorrect conclusions if trained improperly. And of course, you could go in different directions as well and say there could be design flaws in the algorithm itself or in the training architecture. So a lot of opportunities for error along the way. And in the life sciences, we're talking about lives. People could, lose their lives because of an incorrect prediction. For example, a false negative. A false negative in a cancer test means you're going to live with the cancer and you're not going to know it. You're not going to be treated. You're maybe going to find out a lot later when it's too late. So stakes are pretty high. Yeah,
it's interesting. I was reading this book, The AI Revolution in Medicine, and they did a lot of testing around GPT-3, and then also around GPT-4. And one of the interesting things from the book was they were using GPT-3 to analyze medical records and make diagnosis predictions for patients with unique medical conditions. And there were times where the AI would actually, they called it hallucinate information, and actually come up with information that was not from the medical record, just because the way the generative predictive model worked, it kind of needed to fill in a gap. My understanding is a lot of that has, it doesn't, GPT-4 is much more advanced than GPT-3. So, a lot of this stuff we're correcting as technology progresses, but there's always, the possibility of a mistake like that. And that's why, at least in the healthcare world, a lot of the regulatory agencies are looking at the AI systems as an AI human team, right? It's not, you can't rely entirely on AI. There has to be a team whenever it comes to these kinds of situations where, it's diagnosing illness or so on. So it's an interesting thing. But I also think as we progress in technology and some of these things will be reduced, but we'll always have to make sure we've got the right preventive measures in place. It's when right now, because of how prevalent AI is, how many companies are looking at it, the level of disruption that it can cause across various different industries. My feeling is that every company should be looking at how can AI be used to disrupt our industry. They should also be aware that their competitors are doing the same thing, because you want to be ahead of the curve. You don't want to be the company that is disrupted. But at the same time, if you haven't implemented an AI strategy yet, it's not the simplest thing to put in place. You have to look at certain steps, figure out what to do next. There are certain obstacles and complexities to it. Apurva, with regards to a company out there that might, for the first time, start looking at AI and trying to figure out, how can I leverage AI in my business? How can we, change the way the industry is working, disrupt the industry? What kind of obstacles do you think they'll run into, and what kind of thoughts do you have around different strategies and ways they can approach AI?
Yeah, I think this is really critical question. I think the putting a strategy together is really important. I think what we see a lot of companies doing is trying out different options first. Let me maybe share an example of a highly regulated industry where we've effectively used AI, and then some of the obstacles or some of the doubts that they had before they actually put it in practice. So this is in hazardous waste, company that deals with really challenging chemicals and interactions with those chemicals that can cause a lot of disruptions and damages and explosions. So they've got to be really careful. What we've done as part of this, just to help them out with understanding how AI could work. A lot of these systems were really written many years ago. Their legacy code. They've been written in old languages that don't have support anymore. So we were able to use generative AI to convert some of that legacy code into something that a modern developer could use to develop the system and translate it. And a lot of what's hidden in the legacy code are these regulations and compliances, etc. So when we started this discussion with them, they were very skeptical that something like generative AI could help them with. But in the end, they were convinced that this is actually good, because when you have spaghetti code, you've got references to a number of other procedures, and it's difficult for since it's been written over time, over 30 plus years, it becomes difficult to decipher all of that. Generative AI was able to pull out all the safety regulations, the compliance, and make it readable so that somebody could actually code it. And when we started, once we proved through a POC that this is actually going to help you, then the discussion was like, I want to make sure it's private. I want to make sure it doesn't go out in the internet. And so we had to go through a process of getting this inside a secure environment that involved a lot of parties that had to come together. So that's an example of how some of the obstacles that people face, we've been able to overcome. It takes time, takes effort, but it is doable. And now that piece of code is in production.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how AI can be put to use in a very creative way. I mean, to think of all the different systems out there across, government, across various agencies, and various industries, where the system has been built over the course of, decades where maybe it uses legacy technology like Cobalt or something else to be able to do that, code analysis, understand everything that's happening within the system, and be able to convert that to easy to understand language. Very, very interesting example of use of AI, Apurva. Very, very, very interesting. So Dmitry, what about some of the other obstacles that companies can run into? For instance, in the healthcare field, if I'm an organization, a pharmaceutical company, and I want to develop a drug discovery platform leveraging AI, pulling together the right people who understand, say pharmacogenomics or understand bioinformatics, understand the science, and then the deep technical resources who understand AI, and to pull together a team, there's obviously, you have to get the right people. Not everybody is going to know AI plus bioinformatics plus pharmacogenomics. And I assume in other areas it may be similar, whether it's building AI for investments or insurance. Do you see companies having an issue finding the right resources when it comes to being able to build out an AI strategy?
I think what really fascinates me is actually if you replace AI in what you just said with pretty much any other technology that has appeared over the years, the question would still stand. If you replace AI with cloud, for example, you would immediately come up with exactly the same list of obstacles. Finding experts, technological obstacles. We don't have enough processing power, legal, regulatory. Am I allowed to put my customer data in the cloud, knowing that the cloud is just a computer which is somewhere else? Ethical concerns. Is it okay to store personal data somewhere else? Cultural concerns. Are we happy with things being stored somewhere else? So I think we sometimes tend to look at the whole thing in a slightly the wrong way. We keep saying that there are certain obstacles to certain technology being implemented, and then that technology is being replaced by another. In reality, the real obstacle is finding the right application. Is AI actually going to help solve some real life? And if yes, then by all means, let's use it. If not, then no amount of AIing is going to help you because you don't actually have a problem to solve. So if you take any industry, I mean, let's take legal for argument's sake. Legal profession, particularly in the UK, is very conservative. There's still a lot of paper-based work. There's still a lot of manual sifting through documents. Keep in mind that the whole system is precedent-based, so you actually need to find something similar. Can you find a reason to use AI there? Of course you can, because you can actually feed into the ChatGPT or an equivalent sort of 100 petabytes of information on different cases. Chances are it will actually come up with a fairly comprehensive list of different precedents. So yeah, I think all of the obstacles we've seen before, and I think between the four of us, we have close to a century of experience in our industries, at least. The all would still be here. The big difference is that AI can change so quickly that areas where it was actually not helpful, it would actually be able to do something useful in a month's time. And that is probably the biggest obstacle. Are we ready for that pace of change?
Yeah, sometimes I think when it comes to AI and what AI is capable of, it's much more broadly applicable than cloud, right? Cloud is really the way cloud is, like you said, taking a computer here and doing the same thing with a computer somewhere else, a virtual machine. Whereas AI, I think it takes a certain level of creativity to think about how can AI address a given problem in an industry. Or, I mean, Apurva, to be honest, before you brought it up, I didn't even think about the idea of having AI do code review, and, being able to actually go back and pull together basically specifications and an understanding of a way a system was built, using AI to do things like that. Again, that's a very creative way of applying this new technology. But as keeping with the ideas of obstacles and things, Doug, do you think there are any legal or regulatory obstacles to a company just starting out in AI? Should they be reaching out to the regulatory agencies to talk with them beforehand? What's, are there, or is it that they should move forward and just stay up to date with what's being published in their given industry?
Yeah, I think two obstacles come to mind. I'm sure there are others, but one of the challenges I think we face at the moment is the different guidances and regulations that are coming out. So there's a lot of information, and there's certainly some overlap. There are some nuances between the regulations and the guidance, and I think it's challenging for a company to digest all of that, so to speak, and to translate that into their framework and their way of complying. So I think, and in terms of the questions to the regulatory authorities, from my experience, just only companies with breakthrough status, breakthrough technology, this is an unmet medical need that needs to be fast-tracked in the FDA's eyes. I think you get to have that dialogue and that back and forth with the agency. Otherwise, I'm not sure how much feedback you can get back from FDA unless you have that status. But I think that's one of the big challenges. There are so many guidances, and in fact, I'm involved with writing 2 new guidances with the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers. One will be on AI use in clinical trials, and then the other will be how to develop an AI ML compliance framework within a life science company. And I think that kind of leads to my other point, which is that traditionally life science companies and their software development lifecycle frameworks have been geared towards software development, or device development, hardware, firmware, et cetera. And now we're moving into, with AI, more data-driven development. And I think, we're seeing the need for different types of documentation, different processes, different steps. And it's sort of a sub-process to the traditional software development lifecycle, if you will. And that's the details there are still being worked out. So I think that's a challenge to companies to make that switch over. I might say it's organizational change management in some ways, right? Just shifting to understand how to develop, design, test AI, and then also the importance of selecting the right data. So I think that's maybe underestimated, and also you may run into some issues with skill sets where people are, resources are used to doing things one way, perhaps with off-the-shelf systems and getting those tested and implemented versus developing AI, which is pretty intense, technical, and a lot of risks and concerns. So those are 2 that come to mind, Dan.
Yeah. So when I looked across the various regulations across the different agencies I mentioned earlier, there's definitely a theme that goes across everything that the different organizations are putting out there. It's around transparency, it's around privacy, it's around making sure that the data and the algorithm are not biased, ethics, and efficacy, of course, and various other things. When so across these agencies, all saying very similar things. When it comes to implementing AI, how do we ensure that we respect the privacy of data? We ensure we're building out data sets that don't have implicit bias accidentally built into them, so that these systems are potentially making the wrong calculations. I don't know, Dmitry, do you have any thoughts around this? Dmitry?
Sorry, you just broke up for a second. Sorry.
Did you get the question?
Yeah, I did. So slightly off topic. I wonder how many of those organizations that are writing guidances on AI are actually using AI to write those guidances. It's sort of on a tangent. I mean, I think you gave the answer pretty much in the question, because we are operating on the plane of right and wrong, and acceptable and not acceptable for human beings. The only thing we realistically can do is continuously monitor what's going on with the systems that we're building, and making sure the results they're giving us are still within the parameters of right and wrong. We can't really compete with computers in terms of calculation, so we cannot verify that they've done the myriad of operations correctly within sort of realistic time. But what we can do, and what the AI cannot do yet, at least, is decide what is ethical and what is not. So we should look at the results, and judging results, whether they're right or wrong from the ethical standpoint, we can then make sort of deductions whether this particular algorithm is giving us what we want or not. I think so. It's constant monitoring, constant reevaluation of truths that should not actually be accepted for an indefinite period of time, and certain diligence in auditing the results and auditing the processes.
Yeah, in the medical field, as I said, there's this idea that we should be looking at the AI system and the human together as a team, because that allows us to then apply ethical standards to the way that AI is used, as long as we're looking at it as a whole. Also, for instance, when it comes to clinical decision support tools and things around potential malpractice suits, there's even insurance agencies, malpractice insurance agencies, that are adding information into their legal language around the use of AI in healthcare. And all of this is obviously to limit legal liability and to protect the patient and so on. Apurva, do you have any thoughts around in other industries that you've worked in, what companies can do to limit the potential mistakes that AI could make, to limit legal liability and other areas around the proper and ethical use of AI?
Yeah, I think this is maybe an area where there should be some regulations, right? I mean, this is an area where the government can help put some regulations in place, where we are making sure that we AI doesn't go wild and it creates errors, and there's liabilities, and so we need to make sure that we protect against those liabilities and the biases that you just talked about. Especially in the travel industry, there's a lot of diversity and inclusivity that you need to account for. So I think that this is I feel this is an area where regulations would actually be helpful. I maybe take some time to give you another example. I think when I think about AI and companies and how they should use it, I think they should use it for things that don't touch upon ethical liability, bias issues as much. I mean, there are plenty of examples and areas where they could effectively use AIs where none of these factors come into play. I'll give you an example in the travel industry. I mean, it's highly regulated. There are lots of safety compliance issues, compliance reasons why you need to follow rules and regulations. And we've got an example where we've built an AI tool that analyzes lots of manuals, right? I mean, there's lots of regulations manuals. And so there's like a flight attendant safety manual. There's, for maintenance, you've got to, do certain things. There's flight operations manuals. What we've been able to do is take all this data and find out if the safety compliance regulations are uniform across all of these different manuals. And what we found is, interestingly, since they are written by different departments and by different people, some of the safety requirements are not consistent. And this is an area where I think something like a generative AI can help detect regulations and safety violations that are not consistent across a particular travel industry, like maybe an airline. So we built a chatbot that you could ask it a question, and it sometimes comes up and says, hey, I've got two different answers because I've got two different sources of information that conflict with each other. So I think we should focus more on those sorts of applications of AI. Then it's always difficult to answer questions on ethical bias and those sort of things. So I think there's plenty of areas where you could effectively use AI without slowing down the progress of using those tools.
Yeah, thanks, Apurva. Doug, I know you've worked with, been involved with GAMP5, and like you said, you're working on putting together some good practices around the use of AI in life sciences. But can you maybe quickly explain for those who don't know what GAMP5 is, what that is, and then also based on the learning and the way these best practices you're pulling together for life sciences, what do you think are some key things that maybe other industries might want to consider or might be useful across other regulated industries based on what you've learned and what you're working on with GAMP5 and the best practices you're pulling together around AI?
Sure. So GAMP, Good Automated Manufacturing Practices, is sort of a subgroup under the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers. I think GAMP existed in Europe independently and then was sort of merged with ISPE many years ago. But GAMP is an industry work group focused on the life sciences, and the FDA regulations are how can I say this? They're not prescriptive. They don't include the detail of how to actually align with the regulations. So what GAMP does is they issue good practice guides with the input of FDA to put these out and make it clear, you have these options as to how to comply with the regulations. So it provides a lot more detail, a lot more examples, and it's a great reference guide for someone in the life sciences who's trying to comply with an FDA regulation that maybe isn't totally clear. So they hold conferences and work groups and special interest groups and things like that constantly. So moving on to your question, Dan, can you mention this? Can you restate the second part of your question?
Yes. So what are some key things that you're creating as far as the best practices, the guidance for the sciences industry that you feel would also be useful for other industries to consider?
Sure. This won't be everyone's favorite answer, but I think in the life sciences, we've grown accustomed to documenting the transparency around many of the things that we do. But I think, especially now with AI and ML, the transparency and the explainability are really key when it comes to, I think maybe liability around your AI algorithm, because I think in the life sciences, we will have rigorous documentation from the very beginning in terms of like rationale documents that explain the statistical choices that are made when building the algorithms, design choices, things like that. And then as we move through the full documentation lifecycle, we would have heavy documentation around how we select data, what types of data we're looking for, and how we train the algorithm. We would have tests to confirm that the algorithm was trained correctly, the results were as expected. And then beyond that, there would be additional tests along the way, leading up to a clinical trial, which would be very formal with large data sets. So I think in the case of life sciences, the documentation would be there to hopefully limit the liability to some extent, because you'd be able to produce documentation and explain what the algorithm is doing. And it would be sort of transparent in terms of the documentation set that you could provide. In life sciences, we get audited by FDA, regulatory authorities, internal audits, partners, things like that. So there's a lot of independent oversight or review of what you've done and the choices that you've made. So I think other industries can learn from that. I wouldn't recommend coming in with a heavy-handed documentation approach, but I think writing some of these things down along the way would be very useful in terms of defending yourself against legal action.
It's we just received a question from the audience, which kind of goes along with what we were just talking about. The question being, at what point or to what point is it possible to regulate AI when it comes to ethical concerns, and suggesting that it surely cannot be 100%. And I would agree with the commenter. It cannot be 100%. But if you look across at least, the healthcare and life sciences industry, the regulations, you think about what we're putting out into the market, putting out new drugs, we can at least achieve a similar level of control and a similar level of compliance to if we approach it in a similar way. Obviously, there's various testing done on drugs before they're released to the market. And hopefully, as we release drugs, we then surveil the drug. There's post-marketing surveillance trials that are done to make sure that the drug is not causing unforeseen side effects. And if you approach AI in a similar way, where you're testing it up front, you release it to the market, and then you follow upon that by doing surveillance and seeing how the system's performing, you can achieve maybe a Six Sigma level of quality, I would hope. But obviously this requires regulations to step up and get to maybe a more mature level than we're at today. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but that's kind of my take, looking at it from a healthcare and life sciences lens.
Yeah, I think the monitoring will be key. And like you said, we do that, often with clinical trials, where we'll have a phase 4 component to the trial, where it's collecting information after a product has been released to the market. So I think monitoring is definitely key. And I also wanted to point out that in the case of FDA and releasing drugs, devices, AI algorithms now to market, one of the decision factors for FDA is a risk benefit analysis. So you hear these advertisements on TV where the side effects sound horrible to a drug that's actually on the market, and in those cases FDA has decided that there's a bigger benefit to a broader population, and there are certain risks, and people's lives will be affected. So that's a tough decision to have to make, I think, but that's part of it. And I think that can come into play with AI as well. You're not going to eliminate all of the bias, but I think doing your best and eliminating risk or mitigating risk and mitigating bias down to the best level that you can get it is something FDA would look at.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's move on to maybe a little bit more of a business-related question. So again, if we're an organization, we're looking to implement AI to disrupt the industry, and I'm the champion, the AI champion within my organization. I want to convince my executive team, my board, that we need to invest heavily in AI at this point, and I need to describe a return on investment. How do we go about that? Very often people will think of AI as a black box. I have this black box. It's very intelligent. It's going to do magical things, and that, sometimes the training you have to do for AI, getting the right data, making sure that the system can actually achieve the outcomes you're looking for. So just wondering, Dmitry, if you were trying to sell the idea of building out an AI strategy and putting in place maybe an AI-based product to disrupt the industry you worked in your organization, how would you go about selling the idea of AI upwards into the organization?
I wouldn't sell the idea of an AI first and foremost. I would sell the idea of business benefit. What kind of tools we're using is largely irrelevant, because any business basically has four main needs. I want to reduce my costs. I want to see my revenue grow. I want to gain competitive advantage, and I want to be scalable. What kind of tools I'm using is not actually as important to what I'm trying to achieve. So if I'm looking at selling a particular AI, for example, product, I would just look where it actually can get one of those four benefits for my potential client. If the client actually can gain a lot of cost reduction via eliminating manual jobs and converting them, automating them, then that's where I would concentrate. If we're looking at gaining competitive advantage, then I would look whether this particular technology, AI in this case, can be applied to gain a competitive advantage. For example, what you previously had to do in several iterations and over a couple of months, you will be able to do in 5 minutes and then one go, which is actually entirely possible. It's not just fantasizing. So, for example, again, using legal as example, there's a lot of things which are not being done in that space just because it just takes too long. You have to submit certain documents, you have to receive a response, you have to file certain forms in a certain way, and all of that can be automated, and the responses can be passed and understood within this context by an artificial intelligence. And then once you apply on top of artificial intelligence some of sort of organic intelligence, bingo, you get a product which is potentially beneficial for that particular business.
Yeah, I think the reason I'm kind of proposing the question in this way, for instance, in healthcare, there's a very famous sort of AI disaster that happened. Disaster from a business perspective. IBM Watson tried to implement IBM Watson at MD Anderson a number of years ago to diagnose cancer. And over the course of 2 years, they worked to make this work in diagnosing cancer. MD Anderson spent somewhere over $60 million on this, and then just closed everything down. So, there's, at least in the healthcare field at times, because AI is so new, there's questions about, well, how do we know it's going to work?
Demonstrate it. That's the only way you can do with any sort of technology. Demonstrate that it works.
Yeah,
I'm not a specialist in healthcare, but I did spend 30 years in technology, and the proof of the pudding is in eating it. Demonstrate that it works.
Apurva, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think, Dan, and what I found kind of useful is doing some, what we call proof of concepts or POCs, right? Take something that, you think AI would work in, and because it's not going to work for every problem that you have. We've successfully used POCs, and we're lucky at DataArt. We have a lab that sort of specializes in running some of these POCs. And that's also useful to gain the trust of the skeptics, right? Because they don't really trust that they'll give you the benefit of building out a system without actually proving it first. So you run some POCs up front. In the example that I gave earlier about converting legacy code into something readable, we were able to prove that there was a 30 to 40% improvement in the efficiency of getting that coding done. So that proved to them that actually this would work, and then it was a it was a process to get them comfortable that this would be secure, and that then we were able to successfully move it into production. So I think POCs is a good way of just sort of getting people interested, excited, and proving that this works.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You know, it's the way I see it is it's a matter of taking those smaller steps, getting the quick wins, showing and maybe even, you know, looking, for instance, as you said, we have the AI lab here, and we have a number of accelerators that can be plugged in very quickly to show that benefit. So, you know, and in the case of, I was mentioning MD Anderson, if they had approached it in that way, they wouldn't have, you know, ended up spending the $60 million. They would have been able to prove things step by step along the way. Doug, you were going to say something?
I just had an example, you know, back to your question about return on investment. One big example for the life science industry, I think, is in the area of clinical trials. So we know that trials cost a huge amount of money. They take a long time. They fail. They have a high failure rate. They have people dropping out of the trials. And I think AI shows a lot of promise in that area, all the way from, you know, getting people enrolled more quickly, reaching your enrollment goal, you know, to identifying safety issues along the way. So, you know, if safety issues are, if there's going to be some kind of an issue that pops up that could actually put the trial on hold, I think, you know, one example is NLP could comb through patient notes to identify, you know, like warning signs of issues that may be, you know, coming up with the patient. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, cheaper, faster trials, you know, gets medicine to people more quickly. It reduces the cost of medicine potentially. And, you know, I think it also could be looking at, you know, as someone said earlier, humans just cannot comb through all of the data that's generated, you know, in this example, in clinical trials. And so having AI do that, I think will, you know, result in safer medications as well. So I just wanted to add that as, you know, one example. If I were selling, you know, the potential of AI to a pharma company, that would be where I'd start, I believe.
All right. Thank you very much, Doug. And I want to thank the three of you and our audience for joining us today. It's definitely been a great discussion, but it's about the time for us to wrap up. So Dmitry, Doug, Apurva, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the discussion today. And I hope the audience also enjoyed this discussion as we went through it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.